Good evening, friends. A very warm welcome to another edition of the Media Foundation IIC Media Dialogues. These are, as many of you know, a series of panel discussions that the Media Foundation holds in collaboration with the India International Center on an important issue related to the media in the country. Today's topic of discussion is the media, Operation Sindoor, and India's diplomatic outreach. Operation Sindoor, India's military action against Pakistan in the wake of the horrific terror attack in Pahalgam in April this year, was followed by the government sending several parliamentary delegations to various countries to explain India's position on the terrorism emanating from the neighborhood. But how meaningful was this diplomatic outreach, and how effectively has the media reported the issue? These and other aspects of the subject under discussion will be analyzed and debated by the panel of distinguished speakers we have with us today. Before I proceed to introduce our panelists, please allow me to say a few words about the Media Foundation. The Media Foundation is a non-profit which was set up in 1979 with the aim of upholding freedom of expression in the media. It was founded by such doyens of Indian journalism as B.G. Verghese, N.S. Jagannathan, Ajit Bhattacharjee, Kuldeep Nair, and several others. Apart from the media dialogues, TMF also conducts 3 prestigious journalism awards: the Chameli Devi Jain Award for Women Journalists of the Year, the Kamla Mankekar Award for Journalism on Gender, and the Vishwanath Delhi Press Award for Fearless Journalism. May I now introduce our panelists and welcome them on the stage. Unfortunately, Srimati Kanimuri Karunanidhi could not join us today because she has had to rush to Chennai on some urgent business. But I'm pleased to inform you that the other MP on the panel is very much with us. We are honored to have with us Manish Tewari, Member of Parliament in Lok Sabha. He's a former Union Minister for Information and Broadcasting, a Supreme Court lawyer, and has authored 4 books. Mr. Tewari was part of the all-party parliamentary delegation to Egypt, Qatar, Ethiopia, and South Africa. We are also delighted to have with us Mr. Vivek Katju, who is a retired IFS officer and a former secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. Mr. Katju has also served as India's ambassador to Myanmar, Afghanistan, and Thailand. Praveen Swami is a journalist and contributing editor at The Print. He has written on national security issues for several years and earlier worked at the Indian Express and The Hindu. He's the author of 2 books. C. Rajamohan is a contributing editor on international affairs for the Indian Express and a distinguished fellow at the Council on Strategic and Defense Research, Delhi. He has served as strategic affairs editor at The Hindu and the Indian Express. He was director of the Institute of South Asian Studies, Singapore, and was also the founding director of Carnegie India, Delhi. He has published widely on Indian foreign and security policies. His new book, India and the Rebalancing of Asia, will be published later this year. Our moderator today is TMF chairperson Bharat Bhushan. A journalist for over 4 decades, Bharat is the South Asia editor of 360 Info, an academic wire service hosted by the Australian National University. He was the founding editor of Mail Today, executive editor of Hindustan Times, and editor of The Telegraph in Delhi. That's all from me. Thank you, and over to you, gentlemen. Please take your seats on the dais.
So, welcome friends. It was not our intention to hold this discussion before Parliament discussed Operation Sindoor. You know the consequences of preempting this government or even Parliament. So, it is purely by chance that we are holding it today, 1 week before MPs like Manish discuss this issue in Parliament. But you haven't come here to listen to me. You've come here to listen to our distinguished panelists. So I would like to begin with Praveen Swami. Praveen, I would request you to present your views on Indian media's coverage of Operation Sindoor. I would, in fact, suggest the following questions. So you don't have to sort of stick to them at all. You can do what you like, but this is my wish list. Do you think that Indian media's reportage and commentary on Operation Sindoor was deeply controversial, with several media outlets being accused of sensationalism, misinformation, using misattributed visuals from other parts of the world, including Israel's Iron Dome system, and even using problematic terminology? For example, a leading newspaper referred to Jammu and Kashmir as Indian-occupied Kashmir, or IOK. And how did this impact public trust, amplification of false narratives, including Pakistani narratives? And was this a result of lack of editorial oversight, or was it simply wartime jingoism and nationalism? And how did Indian media's coverage compare with the international coverage? Was it less sensational? Did they amplify Pakistani narratives over Indian narratives? Did they verify the Pakistani narrative? Did they verify any of their claims at all? Lastly, would you also like to comment on whether the media questioned the effectiveness of government's new security doctrine of dealing with terrorism, that every act of terror would be seen as act of war? What does this mean? And would this message have any impact on Kashmiri separatists indulging in terrorist violence? Now, I know that's a mouthful, but you can initially speak for about 10 minutes on this, and you'll get another chance after everybody's spoken for another 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bharat, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. The first thing I'll say is that when we speak of the Indian media, there's maybe a problem. There's maybe a problem of naming. A very large part of what passes for the news media is a medium of entertainment. It's there mainly for the purpose of making its audience feel good about itself, in much the same way as going for a movie or watching some villain beat up, some hero beat up some villain might be. And for a very large section of what calls itself the media, the truth-telling function has long ago been. The truth-telling function, is this audible to you now, sir? Yeah, great. The truth. So I'll start at the beginning. I just said that for when we speak of the Indian media, we need to be a little cautious, because a large chunk of what we call the media, in fact, doesn't have any form of truth-telling function. It's long forgotten that part of its role, and exists primarily as an entertainment medium, in the same way a Bollywood film does. You watch a villain, hero beating up a villain, you feel good about it, you feel emotionally sated, or the audience feels emotionally sated in some way. And I want to leave that chunk of the media aside, because, or that very large chunk of our media landscape aside, because it's a pointless and useless conversation. If you choose an entertainment medium to watch, you will get entertainment. And just to add to what you said, Bharat, in addition to using faked clips and so on and so forth, there were even two channels who were quite happily playing clips from a video game, which you can simulate combat on. And I fear that as AI and AI video becomes more advanced, this will become a more and more common practice across the landscape. On the more substantial question of what describes itself as the serious media or the news media and takes that role still seriously for itself, I'd like to say that the media has played an important truth-telling role in its reportage of national security issues. That has sadly never been the truth. National security has been the place at the vanishing point of the Indian media's commitment to questioning and interrogating narratives of power. And we don't have to, do a great deal of research on this. 1962, we played a terrible role. The media did not keep the public informed of what was happening on the borders with China. It was very late to report what had happened. The 1971 war was full of caveated reporting, if you like. Some of the reverses on the Western Front and blunders of judgment were never reported for many, many years later. 1999, the Kargil War. Much of the revelations of incompetence, venality, errors of judgment, infiltration came out long after that war. And I think it's worth pointing out that even to this day, those errors of judgment and errors of generalship and political leadership have not been substantially reported. They're very large chunks that much of the media has never spoken about. Ditto 2001. So we don't, by and large, come to this conversation with clean hands. This has become more and more egregious over the years, though, and I think Operation Sindoor was plumbed new depths, if you like, both to the point where not a single newsroom has seen fit to establish whether how many Indian planes crashed on that day or not by the fairly simple means of going to the villages where Indian planes are purported to have crashed and asking people if they saw a plane crash, which requires no great investigative skill. There wasn't, to my knowledge, a single reporter on the line of control as events unfolded, actually traveling independently, which was perfectly possible. Lots of journalists went to Poonch, went to other places, but made almost no effort to verify or investigate what the ground situation was outside of these little enclaves where they were welcome. And most disturbingly of all, the question you asked about questioning the government's national security narrative, that hasn't been there at all. The saddest part of this story, to my mind, is that much of the information, particularly in this age, is not secret or unknown. If you want to know whether things are getting better or worse in Kashmir, you just have to go online and look at the government's own data, which is now easily available, which it wasn't always, as Bharat would know. And you will see that between 2012 and today, almost nothing has changed in Jammu and Kashmir. We have very comparable levels of violence. There were almost no questions asked about the killings at Pahalgam. Why this happened, why nobody has to this day been found to be responsible or not, and almost no coverage of why this has been the case for a length of time now. We don't know who the perpetrators of the killings in Rajouri were, for example, last year, where again pilgrims to a temple were attacked. Fortunately, not so many people died. We have very little sense of why intelligence networks that were fairly robust not very long ago are no longer quite so robust or able to deliver. And we have almost no sort of delving into why terrorist groups who are supposed to have been completely dismantled by past rounds of offensives. So the earlier operations after Uri and then again after Pulwama, why groups that are supposed to have been deterred, crushed, dismantled, allegedly having had various top leaders shot in various places, why they are apparently so active and undeterred. After all, if you've had to attack the headquarters of these groups after Pulwama, the existence of these, something is wrong. You knew about these groups, you knew about these buildings, and you weren't doing very much about it quite clearly. I'd like to say that in conclusion that this is the result of pressure and from the government. I don't think that's the whole truth. I think there's, as I said, always been a very substantial element of self-censorship when it comes to editors and national security. and quite unnecessary, and in my view, personal view, deeply damaging self-censorship, because questions that need to be asked to improve your system, your security services, the state of your military are never asked. There is no accounting for why planes are shot down or why soldiers are killed, and this goes back to Kargil and before, and as a result, nothing ever changes. I think it's becoming more pernicious and toxic as this idea of reportage as entertainment increases. The bulk of media newsrooms today, in their bread and butter national security reporting, basically purvey various images of masculinity and people jumping around and shooting at things, but really delve very little beyond that. And just to finally conclude, pressure from governments may be a problem. It definitely is. I think many of us in this room have at one point or the other in our careers encountered phone calls from someone hectoring or bullying you. But editors have also, over the years, resisted these pressures in various kinds of ways. In all our past conflicts, you've had little beacons of light holding out, pushing back, doing quality reporting. And to me, the really disappointing feature of this 4-day war is that those little flashes of light that have always been around have not been there, and I think that should lead us to introspect. For what it's worth, I don't think the Pakistan press or the world press necessarily perform that much more magnificently on these issues, but here at least in the New York Times or the Guardian or wherever, you have a basic accounting of events which the Indian public has still been denied. Thank you.
Thank you, Praveen, for such a candid and I would say even a brutally honest analysis of how the media performed. I might add that, in my experience in journalism, I found that there are three beats where journalists have become stenographers to babus who hold office and who do the briefing there. One is Ministry of External Affairs, the other one is Defense, and the third is Internal Security, Home. I would, now I can tell this story. Long ago when Aftab Seth, you would remember, sir, was the Joint Secretary XP, spokesman of the government. He would have a little microphone in front of him, and there would be a room full of foreign ministry correspondents, and people would say, sir, what was that you said after the semicolon? So, taking dictations from him. When I was in Hindustan Times, for a while, I said no unsourced stories from Jammu and Kashmir. Till I get a call from the owner saying that, why are we getting no stories from Jammu and Kashmir? I said, they're all totally unsourced. They should at least say military sources or security sources, police sources. They said, no. Use whatever comes from J&K. So, there are often such directives as well. It's not only this, crime reporters, for example, will never write critically against the police. When I was the editor of Mail Today, we covered Butler House, and our coverage is very different from that of anybody else's, because we think, and I still think, it was an encounter where innocents were killed. Anyway, be that as it may, I don't want to go into that controversy. The point is, the crime reporters refuse to report. If you ask them, how did somebody jump 17 feet and escaped? How come he didn't break a bone? How did somebody escape when the police had encircled this building? They said, sir, we can't report. We'll get nothing from the police after this. So I used a theatre correspondent and the pop music correspondent to report on Butler House, and we got much better reporting than anybody else. So that's the state of the media. But thank you for putting it in context in the national security perspective. Now I call my friend Rajamohan. Raj, you, as a strategic affairs expert and as an eminent columnist, you straddle both the worlds of strategic policy and media. So while I would like you to address some of the questions that I asked Praveen Swami, but also could you please address the following questions? Do journalists writing on strategic affairs, especially during times of war, become propagandists for the government, its force multipliers, rather than people who write independently, investigate official claims to the extent possible, and critically examine the strategic moves of the government. The second issue which you might like to address is about the conclusion of the war. How was the ceasefire reached? And were the Indian goals of war achieved? What were these goals? And how will we know that they've been achieved? Do we wait till the next terrorist strike? Why has the India-Pakistan ceasefire of May 2025 sparked a diplomatic and political firestorm, especially due to US President Donald Trump's repeated claims, 26 times by now I think, that he brokered the peace? While both India and Pakistan confirmed the ceasefire, India has consistently denied any US mediation, calling Trump's assertions exaggerated and misleading. Now, what would happen if India were to publicly concede that Trump actually did play a facilitating role? Would heavens fall? I mean, what would happen? So why are we on this point always saying that Trump said this, he shouldn't have said it, he didn't. DGMO Pakistan called. And where is the evidence of that? Who will give us that evidence? Thanks. You have 10
Thanks,
minutes.
thanks, Bharat. It's really a pleasure to be here. And thanks for organizing this. I think the long overdue, at least some post-mortem, which needs to be done on such a major incident, major development in our affairs. But as we know, truth is the first casualty in a war. So I don't think we should be shocked, everything that Praveen Swami just said. But I think it's also important that while the peak of the conduct of the war, you have this tendency to just go along whatever the government says, that we need a little more, introspection. And can we do this better the next time something happens? This is not going to be the last terror incident, and nor it'll be the problems that we're going to find. So I just want to make two broad points. I think one on the war initiation, the other on war termination. How did the media deal with these two issues? There, I think today, I think Praveen just said, look, it was not much different in 62, but there's a difference between 62 and now, which is now we have an army of commentators, including yours truly, that retired generals, retired diplomats, you have actually, you could say, the community of people who, professional think tankers, there are many more think tanks, there was none in 62, people who reflect and following these things closely and writing. So you could say whatever you said about the reportage of the media, what was the role that the commentators played? I think, did the media, one of the purposes of a media and having experts in courts write is to at least give a context in which we can understand what is going on. That it need not necessarily be a critique of the government, but question of saying, look, what is it? How do we think about what is unfolding in front of our eyes? Here I would say on the war initiation, the assumption that after Pahalgam, we will have to do something. Now, that something was largely left to the government. There was very little debate on, was there only one option of attacking Pakistan? The whole debate then became, when do we attack? Rather than saying, what are the possible options of dealing with this specific terror attack and how you deal with it. In the end, maybe there was only one option. But I think not having that debate, that what would be the costs and benefits of different options, there was very little discussion of that. There's only the question of saying, look, we got to do it, retribution, there's anger, therefore the only option is to actually go and attack. But I think there, I think wish we had a little more debate, not only on the options, but I think the bigger question in the war termination, that we still don't have a decent debate, Praveen has already said, on the security lapse that took place. Now, if the doctrine is, I'm going to go to war every time there's another terror incident, you're setting up yourself for spectacular complexities. So this notion that we're going to do this every time there is an attack, you're going to go to war, I think is a self-defeating exercise, because it's when a sovereign shrinks his space in order to please the public opinion, the consequences when the next incident takes place are going to be even more. At what point? What is a number at which you draw the line? 10, 50, 20? But this is not a job for the reporters. I think this is a job for the analysts and commentariat to actually leaven this debate a bit given the mood of the nation at that point of time, and I think we should have had some more informed debate on that, of what are the different ways of dealing with it. Attack was not the only one. There could have been covert action, or there could have been a whole lot of other things, but I think that debate did not take place. On the security lapse, I would say, in fact, Ambassador Vivek Katju was the only one who wrote, actually, sometime in March, after the the Jafar Express incident, and the explicit comment by the ISPR's briefing on that, saying we will target the perpetrators of the attack in Balochistan. In a way, they were telling you this is going to happen. In fact, to his credit, Vivek was the only one who wrote about it. Then if you had a warning, what was the response to that warning? Well, I think that's a question, at least in retrospect, we should say, if there's an explicit warning from the ISI, we're going to do something in response, then the question is, were we prepared for that? And I think, and then that becomes, look, the big thing is, if you have an incident like this, at every time you're going to turn yourself into this hyper way of responding to it, then the question becomes, actually, you're making it harder and harder for yourself. And I think that's why the focus has always been on diplomacy, but I would say this internal security management, making intelligence the strongest preventive tool, that if we don't do that and merely have this rhetorical position, we'll use military power against every time there's a terror attack, and I think is the worst possible position to put ourselves in. Second, I think on the war termination, what you said about how did the ceasefire take place, I don't think there's any mystery. You say here again, it is when our political discourse has trapped itself that the mediation as some kind of a calamity for India as a whole. This is the national shame that somebody else has come in. And if Manish Tewari might attack the government if it says there was actually a call, the Congress will attack them or somebody else will attack them. But I think you put yourself in a position where you turn a word, mediation, third-party intervention, two favorite phrases, into a prison for yourself. Now, if you take the record, I think this is where I blame the commentariat. If you start from 1987, the brass tacks, to what happened after Pahalgam, in every single incident of clash between India and Pakistan, there was American involvement. Every single one of them. So this notion, we are a compartment here between India and Pakistan. We are nuclear weapon powers. What we do to Pakistan stays inside South Asia. This notion, again, I think is not true. Because as said, from every one of these incidents, sometimes they flew down here. We had the Saudis come by here this time and some others. If you go back to Kargil, the final mediation was done in Washington, where Nawaz Sharif was flown there. He flew on a Saudi plane. It tells you something. You had 2001 terror incident in Kashmir first, and then the parliament attack. You had Colin Powell come here. You had Rumsfeld come here, and they made Musharraf give a speech on January 12th, I think, saying, I won't do terrorism anymore. So the rest of the world is not going to simply stay back and say, guys, you do what you like. We're not going to come in. But that's an objective condition under which you are in. So the challenge for India is not whether there is mediation or not, or external intervention or not. The question is, how do we manage is a better word. How do we manage the external interest of a natural instinct to meddle in South Asia to our advantage? Sometimes we turned it to our advantage, sometimes Pakistan has turned it to an advantage. But this time I think by simply saying there was no mediation or there was no third-party role, it's really the word mediation. If you take that word mediation, officially the government has not denied that Secretary Rubio called twice, that J.D. Vance called once, and Rubio was talking to both sides. So what was the last point that the government made? Rubio called the government of India and said, Pakistan is you should stop this at this point, or the Pakistanis are ready to stop, so therefore why don't you stop? So the official position of India is that we told Rubio, you should tell the DGMO of Pakistan to call our DGMO. So there's no confusion on that. The DGMO did call. That's how it stopped. So now the question is, anyway, you couldn't have carried this war beyond 1 week. Both sides were, suddenly we were running out of, the kind of ammunition. So there was never a question of fighting this war forever, and we will do it. And second, our own position through the Foreign Secretary's briefings was very clear. From the first briefing, when we said, look, we only attack the terrorist centers. We don't want to escalate it. We want to stop. Is when later the Pakistanis attacked, that you attacked on the 7th night, and then you had a whole range of other things that happened. So I think we trapped ourselves. The parliament will be entirely focused on, was there mediation? Why is Trump saying it? But if we as analysts can't provide the context, that in every India-Pakistan conflict, there will be external interest. There will be external intervention of one kind or the other. So that's not as you said, it's not the end of the world. So this is where I think, as for us as analysts, we need to provide at least some history, some background. This is not all something that's happened deep inside 1962. This all happened in the last 20 years. So I would say it's a failure of the strategic community as well to simply drift along rather than provide a context in which the political class is going to go at each other's throat next week in the parliament on the basis of just one word, mediation, while every single government of India in the last 25 years actually had to deal with the international interest in a nuclear weapon powers going to war.
Thank you, Raj, for your brilliant exposition. I couldn't agree with you more. Just a brief point I want to make before inviting Ambassador Vivek Katju. You made an important point about the role of commentators and how it was different this time compared to 1962. But those of you who are not journalists in this room must understand that over time what has happened in newsrooms is that a de-skilling has taken place. There was a time when people like Rajamohan, Praveen Swami, and several others like them were writing in mainstream papers. They were the final authoritative voice on what was happening strategically. And they were well-informed, well-educated people, from good universities with PhDs and so on and so forth. Now that's no longer the case. You have outsourced everything to retired bureaucrats, retired army generals, retired foreign secretaries. All of them become great columnists after they retire and tell the government what to do, things they could have done themselves perhaps when they were in power. And it's very cheap to have them because they're very happy getting 2,500 rupees or 5,000 rupees to write their pieces. And if you had to have a skilled journalist, you'll have to pay much more. But since they write in a number of places, they make enough money, I'm sure. The second thing that's happened in television is that tabletop discussions are much cheaper. If you send a team out for every 30 seconds of footage of production would cost you upward of 30,000 rupees. In 30,000 rupees, you can hold discussions for 2 days or 3 days by paying 5,000 rupees or paying nothing to people who just come to twirl their mustaches on TV and sort of be hawkish. So these are the two phenomena which have really transformed the media in any case. Now I invite my friend Ambassador Vivek Katju.
I'm saying all the time.
But Vivek is known to the world as a diplomat. But like Rajamohan, former diplomat, but like Rajamohan, you also have a leg in the media. After all, the Press Club of India has conferred on you their regular membership as a journalist. You're a prolific columnist. I leave it to you to decide what you want to say about the media's role during Operation Sindoor. But let me ask you to address some other questions as well, if you would like. You may ignore my questions totally. Was Operation Sindoor justified as a calibrated response to the April 22nd Pahalgam terror attack? One. Two, was it, as the government claimed, a carefully considered strategic counter-terrorism measure and not a declaration of war? When does a counter-terrorism measure become war? What is that point? Was it focused, measured, and non-escalatory as the government claimed? And if it was seen to be non-escalatory, why would Trump intervene? Why would Rubio call? Why would J.D. Vance call if they thought it was non-escalatory? So you declared that it's a non-escalatory, but was it non-escalatory? What's your view? And if Operation Sindoor, as the Prime Minister claims, is an ongoing operation, then can one say the achievement of its goals is also an ongoing process? Because the operation is ongoing, goals haven't been achieved, they will be achieved eventually when the operation is over. What does that mean for prospect of another military conflict or full-fledged war? And as a diplomat, tell us why this is important, and I'll get Manish on this later. Why did India need to send all-party delegation to 33 countries to rationalize its actions, including European Union headquarters, to present its point of view, demonstrate India's unified national stance against terrorism, and hope for some understanding by the world? Why did you need it? Israel, whom India wants to emulate, doesn't do it. Russia didn't send any delegations after the invasion of Ukraine. US did not send diplomatic bipartisan delegation of senators and congressmen to explain its bombing of Iran's nuclear sites. Why did Prime Minister Modi or this government suddenly feel we have to rationalize, we have to tell everybody in the world? And what do you think was achieved by these all-party delegations in the countries they visited? Because I know you followed quite closely the joint statements issued by these countries. You have 10 minutes or slightly more.
Bharat, thank you. I must begin by saying that I wonder why you have such a beef against stenographers. I think stenography is a very difficult art. So please have some. Please have greater respect for stenographers, especially when they note that there's what do I do after a semicolon.
Yeah.
So having said that, now let me try to answer the questions you've raised. I think they're very important, but in my own way. I personally think that diplomatically, sending the all-party delegations made a great deal of sense. It's very rare that a country takes this kind of a step, and it's rarer still when some of these delegations are led by members of the opposition. Manish would be in a better position to answer this, but they make a tremendous impact on many countries. I think if it was meant to signal that India was no longer willing to absorb or forgive Pakistani acts of terror, then you needed to show to the world that the political class of India was united in this. And in this respect, I think the government and the opposition did well to go together. As a former diplomat, I know there are seniors present, they can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think as a signal, it's a very important signal. But having said that, the question is, once that what was the world interested in? I think, again, Manish will correct me, but what I picked up was that one, in general terms, everyone condemned the Pahalgam attack. Everyone expressed a great criticism and condemnation of terrorism per se. But no one went to the extent of naming the perpetrator or those who were behind the terrorists. That's a fact. So no one went to the extent of blaming specifically Pakistan. Second, once armed hostilities begin between India and Pakistan, then the act which has led to armed hostilities recedes into the background. And what the world gets very worried about is escalation. And therefore the entire focus of the major powers and of the international community as a whole is on diffusing the situation. And for this purpose, what you call is called mediation or facilitation, but what I prefer to call conversations begin. And it's these diplomatic conversations are natural. Whenever there is a situation of armed conflict, then the countries or the states involved in the armed conflict have other countries who come and start talking to them to try to, if possible, diffuse the situation. And this is especially so when there are two nuclear states. So I think our diplomatic task is to try to establish to the world that the first step on the escalatory ladder is a terrorist attack. Now, the formulation used is that that terrorist attacks are acts of war. I would tend to say that an unacceptable terrorist attack is an act of war. Now, one can argue that what is unacceptable and what is acceptable. I mean, quite frankly, all terrorist attacks per se, the loss of even one life is the loss of one life too many. But it's very difficult to precisely define what is unacceptable. But there are certainly cases where the nation rises up and then the government of the day and the political class have to take note. So let me give you an example. If you recollect, on the day Prime Minister Modi took oath for the third time in June of last year, there was a bus that was attacked in Riyasi, if I'm not mistaken. And that bus had 53 passengers. 9 lost their lives. I shudder to think if the toll had reached, say, beyond 40 or 50. And that was the day he was taking oath. Now that, to my mind, would have created great unhappiness and outrage in the country, and the country would have demanded a response. My next point is that terrorism has been going on for 35 years, and by now I sense that the patience of the country and of the people has run very thin. So the political class, I would tend to think, has no option but to respond. And that is the point that we now need to convey very effectively. And I would imagine that that was the point of sending out the 7 all-party delegations, to register to the world that they might not have named Pakistan, but certainly the message which have registered on them that, look, if there is a terrorist attack which takes place like Pahalgam, then the Indians would attack. Now, which brings me to the next point, which is of narrative. I know that Praveen has argued very persuasively about truth not being a real consideration in reportage. But we all know that information is an instrument of war, and truth is, I think Raja said so well, is a casualty of war. It's only afterwards that you excavate to try to find what really happened. So, but certainly in this information game during action, immediately preceding it and afterwards, the narrative which is presented has to be plausible. And this time around, I find that interlocutors, foreign interlocutors, some of who held very senior positions, have mentioned to me that, look, Vivek, the impression is not there in the world that India scored decisively in military terms. I tend to think, and this has been reinforced again and again by something like what the American president says, and whether we like it or not, he holds the world's most important political office, the most powerful political office. So people, even if he's Trump, people hear him. So the world has got fixated on what happened on the night of the 6th and 7th. At the end of the day, I think we were, that our let me put it like this, that I think that our Air Force did in very credibly, because they were able to find pathways to target all the 9 airfields and demonstrate that they had the capacity to inflict damage. It's an open question whether they should have inflicted greater damage to balance or to sway the narrative our way decisively. But that was a question I would imagine which would have been, or was a decision I imagine which would have been taken at the highest levels of our government. At this stage, let me mention one thing. I do think that the reaction of some of our media was much too exuberant, if I may use the word, and that led to something which which really made me feel deeply ashamed, and that was the direct attack on the Foreign Secretary and his daughter too was not spared. I think that was something that was very painful. I think that's about all that I'd like to say at this stage. I would conclude by saying that we have to now convince the world that the first step on an escalatory ladder between two nuclear states like India and Pakistan is not the Indian response to terror, but the act of terror itself, of the kind that took place, say, in Pulwama or which took place in Pahalgam. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivek. I wish I could say I agree with you, but that's a different point. I'm a moderator. I am a moderator. But let me you can sort of address these issues in the second round. Now, you said everyone condemned terrorism, all these countries, 33 countries we visited. But hasn't the Committee of Nations always condemned terrorism? So what was so special this time around? I don't know many countries which say that terrorism is a great instrument
including
of
Pakistan. Always
I'm saying not many countries, okay? Pakistan also sent delegations abroad. They would have talked about the Jafar Express blast. They would have talked about terrorism in Balochistan. And these countries would have also condemned terrorism even then. So what did you really achieve? Everybody condemns terrorism all the time. It's motherhood and apple pie. The other thing you said was about unacceptable terrorist attacks. That's a good formulation, although you haven't quite defined it. You've defined it emotionally, saying when the nation rises. Who decides when the nation rises or what the nation is? But does it not go? Doesn't unacceptable terrorist attack or terrorist attacks go hand in hand with unacceptable security failures? So you address unacceptable terrorism through act of war, but unacceptable security failures go unpunished. After Pahalgam, not one person has been dismissed, not one person has been held to account. Who's responsible for security in Jammu and Kashmir? Should that person's head not have rolled? So unacceptable terrorism is all right, but unacceptable security breaches and failures also have to be taken into account. Now, you said message of all party delegations was India would attack if there is unacceptable terrorist attack. So what is the world to do after you have put the world on notice? Are you therefore in effect asking the world to hold what you call conversations with Pakistan? And what would those conversations amount to? So I'll leave it at that. Maybe in the second round.
Do you want me to answer now?
No, second round. You can answer all this. And India's attack on the airfields, was that not escalatory? In the name of balancing, were you not escalating? having told them earlier that we are not going to target your civilian and military establishments, and you should stop after we've attacked you, which was a foolish thing to say, I suppose. And then you go and destroy the airfield symbolically. What for? Balancing? And what would that balancing achieve? So if you could address this in the second round. But let me now call our star speaker and my friend Manish Tewari. Manish, give us your perspective of the rationale for Operation Sindoor, its objectives, and the sudden ceasefire. You had rejected the use of the term ceasefire publicly, arguing that India was not at war, but was punishing Pakistan for promoting terrorism, and therefore ceasefire was a misleading term. How would you have liked India's response to unfold if there were no ceasefire? How far should India have gone, and how far could it go realistically and reasonably? And were the aims of Operation Sindoor achieved? And what is the evidence suggesting that these aims have been achieved? Secondly, you were part of this all-party delegation to Egypt, Qatar, Ethiopia, and South Africa. Now, do you think participation of, I know you would have been asked this question several times, but do you think the participation of opposition MPs in Modi government's all-party delegations became controversial because of a mix of political mistrust, lack of transparency, and perceived manipulation of bipartisan optics? Because after all, opposition parties say that they were never formally consulted, although Kiran Rijiju did say that he'd consulted them informally. So I would like you to know whether you were nominated by the Congress. Congress President Mallikarjun Kharge and its leader Rahul Gandhi claimed that they had given 4 names, but only one of them was chosen. Were you that chosen person? Or were you approached directly by the government, given your interest in national security issues? I mean, I know you are a brilliant columnist on national security issues. Now, and what did your delegation achieve? Vivek says that all these countries condemned terrorism, but nobody condemned Pakistan. Nobody held Pakistan responsible except the Taliban regime in Kabul, whom nobody visited. So at that time, when the delegations were being put together, some opposition MPs feared that their participation would be used to legitimize the government's version of Operation Sindoor. Now, this debate is coming up next week in Parliament. So, do you feel, hypothetically, that if your party were to field you in this discussion on Operation Sindoor in Parliament, you would be able to take on the government now that you have gone and presented a bipartisan position, an agreed position that the government takes to the nations you visited? How far has your ability to criticize the government on Operation Sindoor been compromised, if at all? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. And the one thing that you learn as a lawyer is to argue your case the way you want to, not the way the judge wants you to. So therefore, let me start by saying that it's indeed excellent that this discussion is being held even before the formal discussion in Parliament, because in many ways it can provide perspective and context to the discussion which would take place, provided people are willing to consider the inputs very seriously. Let me start by saying that there is absolutely no contradiction between the government and the opposition when it comes to the perfidy of Pakistan. The perfidy of Pakistan has its genesis in the creation of Bangladesh and the Multan Conference of 24th of January 1972, convened by the interim Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto after he took over from General Yahya Khan or Field Marshal Yahya Khan. And there were 2 seminal decisions which were taken at that meeting or conference. The first was that Pakistan would acquire nuclear weapons, irrespective of the cost. And there's a beautiful book on Pakistan's nuclear program called Eating Grass, that we'll eat grass, but we will acquire nuclear weapons. And number 2, that we will wage a symmetric warfare against India. and bleed India with 1,000 cuts. It took Pakistan about 7 or 8 years to try and ramp up that capacity, primarily because Pakistan went through an internal upheaval. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was replaced by General Ziaul Haq, who did not have much credibility to begin with. But then in 1979, there were 4 seminal events which happened together in the Muslim world. One was the takeover of the Islamic fundamentalists in Iran. Number 2 was the siege of the Mecca in Saudi Arabia. Number 3 was the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. And number 4 was General Ziaul Haq, from Chief Martial Law Administrator, became the President of Pakistan and started the process of the Islamization of the Pakistani military establishment. And that inaugurated a completely new chapter in not only South Asia, but in the wider Middle East. Punjab became the first frontier of that policy to bleed India with 1,000 cuts. Between 1980 and 1995, Pakistani-backed terrorists systematically carried out faith-based killings in order to try and create a cleavage between the Hindus and the Sikhs. But it was because of the syncretic and symbiotic relationship between the two communities, what we call no mas ka saath, that Pakistan could not succeed despite trying for 15 years. By the year 1990, it had got upscaled to Jammu and Kashmir. And by the year 2000, it got upscaled to the rest of the country with the attack on the J&K Legislative Assembly, the attack on Parliament, the Mumbai bombings, the 26/11, and then on to Uri, Balakot, Pulwama, Pahalgam. So therefore, there was an entire very well calibrated strategy which unfolded over all these years. This story had never been told in its entirety. And so therefore, what the political delegations were able to do was tell the story of Pakistan's perfidy in a context. What specifically was our outreach to our interlocutors, people that we were meeting? Essentially what we were saying was that the Convention Against Terrorism has now been deadlocked in the UN going back to the mid-1990s because it is stuck on definitional issues. The time has come to proscribe those nations which use terror as an instrument of state policy. And there was resonance on this recalibration with regard to how terror or state-sponsored terror needs to be proscribed, should be approached. And I think to a very, very large extent, we were able to find resonance with regard to the message that we wanted to convey. The fact that it was multi-partisan, the fact that everyone was on the same page, I think added to the weight and gravitas what we were saying as a country. So therefore, to that extent, I would agree with what Ambassador Katju said, that the delegations did achieve what they had intended to do. Coming to the kinetic actions between the 7th and 10th of May 2025, this was different. And I'll explain to you why it was different. On the 15th of April 2025, General now Field Marshal Asim Munir delivers a speech to the Pakistani diaspora in Islamabad, where he drags out the discredited two-nation theory, gives it a fresh dust-up, and presents it as the rationale for the existence of Pakistan. A theory which had been discredited when a nation which was formed in the name of religion could not hold another linguistic minority together, and perhaps perpetrated the worst genocide, which has not been properly documented even now, on its own citizens in East Pakistan. So therefore, that actually spelt the death knell of whatever the two-nation theory was all about. But for General Asim Munir to drag it out, to give it a fresh airing, that was the dog whistle, which culminated in the faith-based executions on the 22nd of April 2025 in Pahalgam. Now, what was General Munir's objective behind delivering that speech? That is something that we need to very seriously introspect. Why did he drag out the apparition of Muhammad Ali Jinnah? There was no occasion for him to do that. There was no provocation. Was it that he was trying to consolidate his own position given how tenuous things are in Pakistan? I think we as a country need to seriously apply ourselves to that question. So what happened between the 7th and the 10th of May wasn't a preemptive action. It was retribution or reprisal or a reaction to the original action of faith-based executions, which is the oldest leaf in the ISI's playbook, now going back to 1980. They have been trying to create discord. And it is the syncretic strength of India that hasn't allowed their very nefarious and noxious designs to succeed. I think there should be no confusion about this at all. Now, coming to how efficacious those actions were. And this is where the media has a role to play. And I hope the debate in Parliament does not become a he said, she said, which unfortunately is what we have really come down to. But the serious questions that need to be asked is a conventional response against asymmetric warfare an efficacious response? Would it really stop or proscribe the next terror attack from happening? Number two, is there space for a conventional war or conventional action under a nuclear overhang? Number three, if there is space, as a number of military strategists, including Mr. Rajamohan and people believe, then how much is that space? Number four, if you are on an escalatory spiral without any institutional off-ramps, then how do you get out of that escalatory spiral? Or will that escalatory spiral, the next time such an attack takes place, given its magnitude is serious enough and what constitutes magnitude can be argued, would we be again up that escalatory spiral? So these are very, very serious questions which actually Parliament needs to address itself to when it has a serious structured debate on national security. But I unfortunately don't see that happening. And that, unfortunately for me, is a complete tragedy and a travesty. So therefore, question is, if this conventional kinetic action is not the most efficacious deterrent, then do we have to mow the grass regularly? I think going forward, given the fact that there are 2 nuclear weapon states in play. And a third one, which, going by some of the statements made by some of the army generals in the public space, was not an observer but an active participant in helping Pakistan navigate its way through those 4 days, these questions become all the more serious. The last thing I would like to say is with regard to third-party mediation. Look, the difficulty between earlier and now, the instances which Mr. Rajamohan rightly pointed out, that you have a gentleman in the White House who believes that back channeling is front channeling. That's the real problem. And this is not the first time that he has done it. When Pulwama, Balakot happened, he was in Hanoi, the summit with Kim Jong-un had failed. If you read John Bolton's account or Mike Pompeo's account, it's very descriptive about, how the phone lines were worked on both sides. Even then, he had announced that there'll be good news from India and Pakistan very soon and, missiles will stop flying. So he's done it again. So I don't think, we should be very surprised about it, because third-party mediation, and as a lawyer I can say that, is a very structured format. When 2 parties agree to an arbitration, appoint an arbitrator, and then decide to abide by the award of that mediation/arbitration. India went through that phase when we took Jammu and Kashmir to the UN between 1949 and 1965. In 65, when the Soviet Union intervened, there was structured third-party mediation. But after Simla in 1972, of course, countries are going to be worried. If you have 2 nuclear weapon states going at each other, the world is not going to, stand by and say that you can do what you want. There will be concern, there will be back channeling. The only difficulty with President Trump is that he believes that back channeling is front channeling, so therefore you'll have to live with it. That's the nature of the person who's there in the White House. And last, to answer Bharat Bhushan's question, does it conflict me in any manner? Well, I don't think so. And the reason why I don't think so is because for me, the whole question of terror is very personal. And it is non-partisan. And therefore, irrespective of who picked me up, who did not pick me up, who had what opinion, or who had what reservations, it was my responsibility to go, and I'm proud that I played my part. Thank you.
Thank you, Manish, for that brilliant exposition and explaining why you went. I have nothing much to say except that when you say, for example, that General Munir's speech led to Pahalgam attack, no, it's a correlative conclusion. It's a logical fallacy. It's a logical fallacy called post hoc ergo propter hoc. After this, therefore, necessarily because of this. Terrorism, therefore, necessarily Pakistan. I'm not saying Pakistan is blameless, but I'm saying you need to provide evidence. These are large claims, and they can have enormous consequences, as we have seen. So maybe one needs to rethink that a bit, but I'll leave it at that. Now we go through the panel again, asking to make their concluding remarks. We'll again begin with Praveen. If you'd like to say something on the commentariat, particularly I want to know whether these people are briefed in advance, because this government operates with very tight narrative control. So one has heard rumors, for example, that some strategic experts are briefed. There are lists given to channels on who to invite, who not to invite. Is that true?
So,
brief, just 2 minutes. Yeah.
So very quickly, the truth matters. Right? No war in history has been won by telling a story or winning a narrative. And one of the unfortunate things that's happened in the last few years is this obsession in Indian military circles with what's called narrative warfare. This happened after Iraq, where it was widely believed that the Americans have won the war because things are on TV and there are pictures going around. Our military picked this up after 1999. And it's become one of those fashionable truths now where the government thinks that by circulating lists coming from the ruling party's media apparatus, by conducting briefings, by towing the party line, that you will win a war. You won't. I just want very briefly make 3 small points. First, the truth of what India says is not self-evident. We are less than, last Monday was it, when the Bombay High Court acquitted 5 people who had been on death row for the train bombings in Mumbai, which we blamed on the Lashkar-e-Taiba, quite correctly. But the 12 people who were on jail and 5 in death row were not people who had anything to do with the Lashkar-e-Taiba, who had anything to do with terrorism. And the great irony is that by framing these people and locking them up, our police service directly enabled the people who had actually done it to continue to operate for several years, with the deaths of over 250 people, including in this city. So when we go to the world community and say, we don't need evidence, the Pakistanis did it, this is not a self-evidently true proposition. We don't have a great record. The second thing I'd like to say is, of course it's true, the Pakistanis have terrorist groups. You drive down Bhavalpur, you see the Jaish-e-Mohammed seminary, it's there. The Lashkar-e-Taiba has an office in Muridke, everyone can see that. Punching holes in the masjid, in the gumbad of some building doesn't constitute deterrence though. Not a single important terrorist has been killed in this operation that we know of. And there's absolutely no evidence that any of the actual perpetrators of this operation or the perpetrators of any other operation in Jammu and Kashmir have been hurt in any way by what has happened. This is also important to remember when we say deterrence. Finally, when we say we condemn unilateral, we condemn terrorism, it's all very well to be morally angry about it, and people have every right to be. Let's also remember that the National Security Advisor of this country, in an article published in the Indian Police Journal in 2012, has said that offensive covert warfare is one means of deterring an adversary. In recent months and years, the Indian media has repeatedly claimed to have gone and shot people in various corners of the world. And we stand accused in a criminal trial in the United States of doing this to an individual on their soil. So when you say, talk about a world united against terrorism, about building a moral consensus, it's probably best to go into that debate with clean hands, which in this particular case, this moral uprightness probably is not entirely upheld by the facts.
Thank you. So can we have Vivek next, please?
Bharat, I'll make 4 small points. The first is a response to what you asked directly. How were the attacks on the airfields part of our counter-terrorism effort? Once the operations began, the Pakistanis did not accept that we had targeted only terrorist sites. They targeted our civilian and military infrastructure, and therefore the operations then necessarily assumed a different dimension. They went to the world crowing that they had downed certain Indian aerial platforms, and as I said, then our Air Force had to find pathways to show to them directly that we had the ability to penetrate their air defenses and strike them where we want to. You asked whether demonstration strikes had any utility. I do think they did. The question I have in my mind, to which I think people who are playing the game now would know better, but that question remains is if we should have had a more decisive strike that day or not. Personally, I believe we should have had. Second is, I think the issues raised by Manish are very, very significant. Is conventional response the only efficacious response to a Pakistani unacceptable terrorist attack? I believe you have no alternative. You do not have the capacity which the Pakistanis have developed in terms of asymmetric warfare. So if you don't have that capacity, you either had the pre-2016 surgical strikes position where you said that you will only employ diplomatic means, but once you moved away from that to kinetic action, then the only kinetic action possible is through conventional forces. Now, so then once you use kinetic force, it has its own dynamics. And the world then gets terribly concerned about escalation. And that is why I argued that can we get the world to agree that Pakistan needs to be put under enormous pressure to stop this, because it is now playing too dangerous a game, because the Indians are no longer willing to absorb terrorism. That is the point that I think is significant. And that is where I think our diplomatic effort needs to be focused. Directly focused, that we will not accept this. And lastly, I think Manish himself will bear me out that I think I'm happy he's agreed that these all-party delegations played a very, very good role diplomatically. But the fact is that people are between two nuclear states. They don't want to take sides. And last point, and that is where the diplomatic struggle for us is. You asked, what do we wish to do? My answer is clear, that if I was there, I would focus an enormous amount of diplomatic effort in telling the world that please tell the Pakistanis that the dangerous game they've played for 3.5 decades, they cannot play anymore, and they must take out terrorism from their strategic doctrines. Thank you.
Thank you. Manish, your concluding remarks?
No, I'll just make a very quick point with regard to providing evidence. I think the Kargil intrusion was a no-brainer. I think enough evidence was provided after the Parliament attack of 2001. More than enough evidence was provided after the 2008 Mumbai attack. Post the attack on the Pathankot air base, right after Prime Minister Modi decided to make an unscheduled stop in Raiwind for Nawaz Sharif's granddaughter's wedding, how well considered that was is really debatable, but be that as it may, the Prime Minister chose to go there. You had a terror attack on the airbase in Pathankot. You still walked the extra mile. You said we'll have a joint investigating team. You let the ISI come in on that joint investigating team. And after they went back, they said it's a false flag operation. You guys did it yourself. So, how can you really try and provide evidence to someone who is or who has institutionalized a policy of bleeding India with 1,000 cuts? So therefore, nothing is really going to make them back down from something which they feel has given them asymmetric dividends, now going back 45 years. And that raises the question that, have we been too conflicted as a democracy? That the only way to fight fire is with fire. And therefore, under those circumstances, given the very tenuous nuclear equation which is there. Pakistan has a first use doctrine. India has a no first use doctrine, but those thresholds are very fluid. You have China, which is also a nuclear weapon state. You have active collaboration between China and Pakistan, something which has been documented very well now, going back eons. So under those circumstances, some of these questions have to be thought through very seriously, because as a nation, we can't just keep absorbing attack after attack after attack whenever somebody wants to target us. Coming to the whole question about security lapses, and I don't hold a brief for anybody, but as someone who grew up on the trench lines of fighting extremism, militism, terrorism in Punjab, look, the terrorists have to get lucky only once. You have a security force which is stretched very thin. And it's quite possible for 4 or 5 people to get through and create mayhem. Yes, there should be accountability. Those questions need to be asked. I'm not saying that people should not be held to account, but there is a reality with regard to, how much is the footprint of the security forces 24/7, which will be able to deter every attack. And I'll stop at that.
Thank you. Raj, your concluding remarks, please.
I think let me say something from a purely realist perspective. Not all of you might not like it. What is the main lesson from Operation Sindoor? I think this is not a new lesson. What is clear is we don't have the military edge to offer a decisive defeat to Pakistan. That the gap, your capability is not so large. You have economic gap today. Indian GDP is 10 times bigger than Pakistan's. But your military capability is not so advanced that you can put Pakistan down and teach a lesson on terrorism by deterrence through punishment. That option you do not have at this point. So that leads you to 2 sets of issues. One, what have we done about our military modernization? Budgets had gone down below 2%. None of the reforms that have been talked about by successive governments have not been implemented. And every time you try to do something, there is some political controversy. But the fact is, we have allowed post-Kargil, some reforms were made, but the structure remains ossified and is not in a position to deal with the challenges that are emerging, remained from Pakistan. Here is Air Force Chief, repeatedly said the number of Air Force squadrons have been going down consistently for the last 30 years. But you can't, or bureaucracy cannot take a decision on acquiring an aircraft 20 years, 25 years. If that is the quality of your national security decision making, you're not ever going to get that edge. There's a separate question of you do have the money to go beyond 2.5 at one time. Under Rajiv Gandhi, India had reached 3% of the budget. So those set of issues are not debated at all. There will be no national security debate, as you said, even this time and tomorrow, next week in Parliament. Nobody's going to talk about it. It is mediation. What happened? So it's going to be a political debate, not a policy debate. But this where I think this so-called commentariat, we need to, and the think tanks, we need to begin to say, because the character of the war is changing. That's another lesson we've learned from Sindoor. The whole drone stuff. We're seeing that in Gaza. We're seeing that in Iran. So there is actually the nature of the warfare is changing. Therefore, if we don't adapt, there is a problem. Second, I think in terms of, it was a famous victory, so we all declared victory. But the fact is this, Pakistan has also declared a victory. They're even more happier than you. Because for him, standing up against India was victory in itself. That he lasted 5 days, that itself is a victory. Just as Iran says, we won. If Iran says against Israel, after 15 days of relentless bombardment of Iranian cities and establishments, and defense establishments, Iran says we won. So victory is not a objective reality, but how a political class constructs it for itself. So therefore, the idea that we won against Pakistan is not, Pakistan doesn't think it has been defeated. So to put it very badly, wrestle with a pig. The pig is happy that it's wrestled with you. So I think this takes you back to the question, do you have the decisive military edge? What are you going to do about your military capabilities? That's one. Second, I think, on terrorism issue, I think world is not going to, Manishji, world is not going to come and condemn Pakistan. Vivek, that period of 9/11 has passed. The peak anti-terror global interest has passed. No one is going to come and say, yeah, let's start all over again, the old thing that has happened. However much you might try in diplomacy, in every forum you're going to go back and talk about terrorism, cross-border terrorism. I don't think there is that moment of the kind that you had after 9/11 that you can mobilize today. And most important from a cynical realist point of view is this. Terrorism, people will come to you only when it affects them. Pakistani terrorism does not affect the world. It affects only us and Afghanistan. So therefore, the expectation that diplomacy will produce international commitments to isolate, punish Pakistan. Look, there's no agreed definition on terrorism in the UN. Forget it. There's not going to be a convention on terrorism. We've been talking about it. So there is that problem. So therefore, I think the most important thing for us, getting a military edge will take a long time, is to create the capability to prevent terror incidents. That is something entirely in your own hands. If you don't modernize your intelligence apparatus, if you don't create the capabilities to stop terror attacks, which Israel does, for example, in a big way, that is your principal defense against this. And I think strengthening that is the core answer. And I think there, we always talk about how few foreign service officers are there. I don't know, all of you know how few are there in the intelligence establishment. It's probably one of the smallest. And therefore, not to invest in your intelligence establishment. I think that is a very, very critical requirement, a modernization of Indian intelligence. And finally, I would say, this is not, none of you are going to like it, that are you going to say you're never going to talk to Pakistan? If you see the last many crises, each time after you ended up talking. But this idea that we'll have nothing to do with him, we'll shut down their YouTube channels, we won't let you read the Dawn newspaper. I think, again in the war, but I think that question, what do you do with the problem called Pakistan? You try different things, but I think that problem is not going to go away of how you think about Pakistan as a neighbor and how we're going to deal with it. Unfortunately, that debate needs to take place. Sorry, Bharat.
Thank you, Raj. Vivek wants to have the last word as usual.
No.
Yes,
I'll just say this, that Raj, I think that once kinetic force is applied, then terrorism between India and Pakistan becomes a problem for the international community as a whole because of the nuclear dimension. That is why I'm urging that we've got to tell the world that please tell them to stop, that this security doctrine that they have needs to change. It's too dangerous for the world. Not because of anything else.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm not going to summarize this complex and layered discussion. You take home whatever you want to take home. We'll have some questions. My only request will be, please don't give a speech, don't give comments. You want to be part of our discussions, give me your names, we'll invite you as a panelist next time. But here just now, because we have limited time, we have less than 10 minutes. So identify yourself, tell me to whom your question is addressed, and keep your questions short. No comments, no speeches, please.
Hello, good evening. My name is Mandar Deshmukh. I have a background in public relations, so I understand when narratives, the way they work. An analogy was used by Mr. Katju here of the bus attack that happened during the swearing-in ceremony of Modi ji, Prime Minister. And I couldn't resist but think about another analogy for Operation Sindoor for the Pahalgam attack that it actually occurred when J.D. Vance was in India. So, if there was some relation there, and I see myself personally that the involvement of America or American was right there from the start. So that is one. And the second.
What is the question? What's the question?
So the question is that why is then India trying to narrativize in a different way by not acknowledging the involvement that Americans or some way they had?
So this is a question for Vivek.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So
My question is to
okay, Dinesh.
I'm Manish Tewari. Manish, I also come from Punjab, Amritsar. See, you drew attention to what Munir said about two-nation theory. Are we really a secular nation today? In fact, RSS is wanting, even out of preamble, the very word secular and socialist. The kind of nation that we are creating, we are actually proving the other side that they have a point. And so do we have a moral right at the moment, the way we are going about, really dealing with the questions in South Asia itself? And I think we are encircled by hostile powers out of our own making as well. And I don't want to continue, but we can continue this conversation. But it is an important question. We do not have any moral right because we are not anymore a secular nation.
The gentleman here.
I'm Dr. Raghuvansh, journalist. Earlier I was with Hindustan Times, PTI. So, Mr. Praveen Swami, I totally agree with your analysis of the media going rhetoric. But surely there was difference between the TV and social media and the print media. Print media was not so rhetoric. And I'm not saying that they were perfect, but the deterioration even in the print media is not because of Operation Sindoor. It's a process going down for the last 10 years. You take up any issue and they don't really go into the detail of the thing. So could you give us a little bit more light about how the print media was different from the television media?
Nalini Ranjan Mohanty.
My question is to Manish Tewari about we do not know what we get to know from you or other members of delegates that your trip delegation was successful. We read just one report in Times of India, one Mr. Ladwick, who was present in Ravi Shankar Prasad-led team, I think in London. And that report said how that delegation cut a sorry figure. Anything that was asked about the team, it was asked, you want the world to condemn Pakistan because it is killing civilians. Why aren't you condemning Russia, who started killing Ukrainians? Why aren't you condemning Israel? You condemned rightly Hamas. But why aren't you condemning Israel, which is destroying the life of thousands of Palestinians? He said there was absolutely no answer. And about the question of finding how can you just charge because previously some country was a culprit, so now it's a culprit without having got hold of your own, having got hold of these culprits themselves. Why can't you? It's a law in jurisprudence that because someone is a criminal in the past, cannot be held responsible for criminality now. So and he said in every question, the delegation failed badly.
Okay. All right. So we'll have answers first and then we'll do another round. So Vivek, do you want to answer Mandar Deshmukh?
As I said, in such situations, countries have conversations. I call it conversations. And we never disacknowledge that we are not in conversation with states. But that doesn't mean that our policies or our decisions are determined or forced on us. I do think that all governments of all parties have maintained India's strategic autonomy.
Manish, there were two questions to you. One on whether India has the moral right to condemn two-nation theory speech of General Munir, and the second.
You know, the delicious irony is that all the delegations, wherever they went, they sang paeans of India's multiculturalism. So I do hope that they take the message back to their respective political parties, that they need to moderate their domestic positions, because those domestic positions do not play out very well in difficult times. That's a very valid point, you know, and that's a valid concern, which is taken on board. Insofar as what somebody wrote or somebody didn't write, it's neither here nor there, because I've heard from people who were present in that meeting in London, and their feedback is completely to the contrary. So therefore, you need to factor in the fact that there are people who may have a legitimate perception. They may be people who are acting for hostile interests in order to create certain narratives. So I don't think that is something which needs to be taken very seriously just because one person said something. And to your question about, you know, we didn't condemn Russia. Well, I led the discussion in Parliament on the Russia-Ukraine war in the March of 2022. And yes, we condemned the Russian aggression of Ukraine. Even the government, when Minister Jaishankar replied to that, you know, I think the position was nuanced, it was calibrated. The question is, at all those who are looking for condemnation for us, how many of those people stood by us when we had a 4-year border standoff with China? Did you hear any of those in Europe condemning China for what it did when it transgressed into India's borders and stayed there for 4 years? So therefore, this is a lot of sanctimonious humbug. You know, the standards which they expect out of us are not the standards which they are willing to apply for themselves. Insofar as Israel and Palestine are concerned, I think nobody ever condoned the events or the terror outrage of the 7th of October 2023. And nobody condones, or rather condemns very strongly, the collective punishment which is being meted out by Israel to innocent people. Well, I think the government of India has also been, has taken a very forward-leaning position, you know, at times. So under those circumstances, as a country, we have come out fairly strongly with regard to the absolute inhumanity of what Israel is perpetrating in Gaza. In fact, it is not serving the Israeli cause. They've really lost the narrative because of that.
Okay, thank you, Manish. Praveen, Dr. Raghuvansh's question, difference between print, TV and social media.
Dr. Raghuvanshi, I think it's a valid point. The print media was by and large more restrained and less hysterical than TV. But I think one should be a little careful about taking this too far. Print also didn't do a great job of reporting from the ground or asking difficult questions. And this is becoming more and more of a problem. I remember the first time I met you, Bharat, which you won't remember because I was a nobody reporter and you were an HT editor. You were in a business class flight from Patna, sitting in the front of the plane. Today, there is no journalist in this country who, apart from a proprietor, who can afford to fly business class. And as you pointed out,
this is embarrassing.
No, but also the amount of money being committed to reportage from the ground or the cultivation of expertise in any field is diminishing by the month. I think those of us still in newsrooms appreciate the pressures on budgets and bottom line. So I anticipate this is going to get worse in years to come. I just want to make a small point about what Raja said, I think very correctly, that the other side also has to think that you won. The first person to make that point was a Roman poet called Aeneas in 169 BC, that to be victorious is a wonderful thing, but the vanquished must also agree that you are victorious.
Manish, you wanted to add something?
No, I, since I handle the information and broadcasting remit, I usually refrain from commenting about the media. But as Churchill had once said, that in war, truth is too precious and she should be accompanied by a bodyguard of lies. The fact is that it is for the media to really introspect as to what should be the calibration of that disinformation. Because when you start losing plausible credibility, I think you reach an inflection point where you do more damage to yourself and to the narrative that you are putting out than really helping its cause.
Thank you. I don't know whether I agree with introspection about the scale of acceptable disinformation in the media, but anyway, we can
have a separate discussion on that. I have a lot to say on that.
Sure. By having practiced disinformation as the Minister for INB, I'm sure you'll have a lot of insights. But we'll have a quick round of questions, just maybe 3 questions. The gentleman there first.
My question is for the Honourable Member of Parliament, primarily. Don't you think that in the end, it's not a matter of whether one is secular and the other is whatever, it's a matter of what serves the political interest of a particular party or group of parties. India's case was impossible to defend from the moment India refused to align with the West on the matter of Ukraine. And yet Ukraine was the aggressor initially, under NATO auspices. So this being said, I think whatever can be done is a matter of strategic relevance and the ability to make a point with greater power and authority, but you cannot expect to win on points of virtue and morality. Do you agree? Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Dudeja.
Yeah, Mr. Manish, can you give the political implication of this Operation Sindoor to India, Pakistan and US? What will be the...
Another lecture you want?
No, just brief.
That's
okay. Yeah.
My name is Steve Rajpurohit. I am senior researcher at GeoJuris today. My question is to Rajamohan sir. Chinese material support during Operation Sindoor is quite open now to Pakistan, and neither US or West openly named Pakistan behind the Pahalgam attack. And there is material support from US and West to Pakistan. This was the case in 1970s and 80s too. It always got allied with both of them, both the wings. So does India's non-aligned / multi-aligned works?
Okay. Priyata.
Thanks, Bharat. My question is to Mr. Tewari. I wanted to reiterate the question that Bharat asked you, which you did not respond to either by mistake or on purpose. This is about whether your name was on the Congress's list to be a part of the all-party delegation. And I also want to get your opinion on whether you think that the Congress could have taken a lot more ownership for leaders like you or Mr. Shashi Tharoor for representing the government of India or the nation to create this sort of consensus against Pakistan, or at least their involvement in terrorism, which I do think that you all did a great job. Do you think that the Congress could have done more?
Okay, the person next to you, and that's the last question, please.
Hello, my question to...
So what's your name? Identify yourself.
Okay, I'm Akshit from, and I'm doing PhD at Delhi University. So my question to diplomat Vivek Katju. Sir, as we all know that Chinese were quite involved in retaliation by, the second retaliation, not retaliation I would say, but the response that Pakistan did after 6 to 7 night of May. So I just wanted to ask, did we achieve any kind of deterrence since Chinese are there?
Yeah, this is my last question here. Somebody here wanted to ask a question. Yeah.
I'm Marisha and I'm a LAM fellow by PRS Legislative. My question is open to the panel, you may allocate it. So media didn't go for an on-ground reporting in LOC, but however, we saw an overwhelming number of Indian TV journalists flocking to Israel to report on Israel-Palestine conflict. So as Rajamohan sir already said, truth is the first casualty in the war. Is it also that nationalistic sentimentalism survives it? Because does the media see its hand tied in the reportage of incidents on internal or national security due to the fear of being tried on accusation of being anti-national? Is it also, does it also stand true of restrictions that a government may face in choosing alternative responses to an attack like Pahalgam, as mentioned by Manish sir, or is it because of our own one-dimensional interpretation?
Yeah, got it. Okay, so shall we begin with this last question, and Manish will be the last thing because you've got the most number of questions.
Very quickly, yes, the Indian media is and has long been scared of being accused of being unpatriotic. It's also on the question of Israel that you asked, the best way to get publicity is to pay for it. So today, the reality of Indian journalism is that if there's a friendly government willing to take journalists around and pay for your TV crew and hotel, you can be assured of as much publicity as you're willing to pay for. There's just one question I had which I was very intrigued by, and I heard Manish say it also, which is that the Chinese intruded, into our territory. The Prime Minister has nowhere said this, so I'm a little astounded to. No, but on a serious point, it may be true that China supported Pakistan, materially and significantly in this conflict. Why this air of deep surprise over this? Were our military intelligence services unaware of what equipment the Chinese had supplied? Were they not aware of what the Pakistan Air Force was doing in its exercises? And if so, who accounts for this quite astounding failure, which on which information is available in any military journal you choose to subscribe to on the internet? I mean, it's hardly a secret.
Okay, Vivek, there was a question to you.
Praveen, as usual, you've been provocative, and I won't enter into.
The question was to Mr. Modi, not to you.
No, not the Modi provocation, but that why weren't we aware of what was happening? I think that's a legitimate question, but provocative all the same.
$55, sir. You can subscribe to James for a year.
It's, for a retired person, $55 is a hell of a lot of money.
Not according to Bharat.
but on a serious note, I think we've got to take the China-Pakistan nexus as a fact of diplomatic and security life for India. It just will not go away. In years to come, it will only strengthen. I'm convinced of that. I'm equally convinced that the agreements we'd reached with China in the 1990s no longer can be sustained. I think they have different fishes to fry, the Chinese. Which brings me to this fact that we've got to rely on our own resources, and that on the 10th we demonstrated, perhaps not adequately, to the world that we found an answer through the air defenses of Pakistan. We found pathways to attack them. I only wish it was done more convincingly.
Yeah, okay, we're running out of time, really. Rajamohan, there's a question from Mr. Purohit for you.
I think India was truly multi-aligned. We had Russian fighter aircraft, we had the French fighter aircraft, we had Israeli probably missiles, we had American M777 guns. So you had actually, because we buy equipment from everyone. But this has nothing to do with the doctrine of foreign policy. So don't get into multi-alignment, non-alignment. The main point is, don't expect that Pakistan will not get support from the others. That given the state of China-Pakistan relationship, and even more important, this is going to be a problem for us over the longer term, that the quality of the Chinese military equipment, some people say it didn't work very well, but the fact is their military capabilities are growing. The scale and intensity of Chinese production, Americans are nowhere near matching them. So that is going to be your problem when Chinese military equipment starts coming into Pakistan in much larger numbers, more sophisticated. Your challenge of balancing that is going to be harder, and that's why, take you back, forget what others are doing, but you have to go back to the drawing board and say, look, how do I create the capabilities, asymmetric or otherwise, to deal with the changing military balance in your neighborhood?
Bharat, may I just interject for 1 second and add there that it's not just a question of buying things off the shelf. We talk about a fighter program right now. A lot of this has to do with pure math, for example, physics and mathematics. How many pure mathematics PhDs are we producing in a year? Very close to zero on average. What is our enhanced investment in our physics departments and our engineering departments? Not great compared to the Chinese. So there's a bigger question around this.
And mathematics.
No, this is fine. So to your question about vice and virtue and morality, I don't think anybody is operating on the principle of vice or virtue or morality. You're operating on the principles of cold, hard realism. And even in Europe, there was absolutely no supporters of the terror which had been perpetrated on India on the 22nd of April in Pahalgam. I don't think there was anybody who was willing to say that or who even obliquely suggested that it was par for the course. So therefore, I don't think on that score, the fact that we were not that forward-leaning on the Russia-Ukraine question in any way detracted from the point that we were trying to make. To your question with regard to what are the lessons these kinetic actions have really what do they mean for these three countries? Well, I think from India's point of view, it's very clear. You've crossed the Rubicon. So therefore, till the time you do not rethink your doctrine of how do you combat asymmetric warfare, you are now on the conventional escalatory ladder. And therefore, that conventional escalatory ladder can become quite slippery because there are no off-ramps. What is the lesson for Pakistan? The lesson for Pakistan is that it is not business as usual. You cannot operate under a nuclear shield or under the subterfuge of nuclear blackmail and carry out this asymmetric warfare. And the message for the United States of America very clearly is that they have to make a decision. They are really at an inflection point. The West incubated a strategic project called Pakistan way back in 1947. In fact, there were only two faith-based states which were formed then. One was Pakistan and the other was Israel in 1948. And if the United States of America considers China to be its foremost strategic challenge, then it really needs to introspect as to who really would they want in their corner. To your question that I ducked Bharat's question, no, I didn't duck Bharat's question. Frankly, it's irrelevant, because I think national security is too serious a business to be distracted by sideshows. So therefore, had that question even been anywhere in the horizon of my mind, I would have definitely answered it. You know, because for me, it's a non sequitur, it's a no-brainer. There are certain things which you need to do in national interest, and they have to be done.
Raj? That's it. Okay. So, as we move towards the conclusion of this evening's discussion, I don't have much to say except that this phrase that you have to fight fire with fire stuck in my mind. You take the literal meaning of fire. I've never seen fire putting out fire. You take the military meaning, responding to fire with fire always leads to ceasefire, which you often don't want to accept, which is imposed on you. So I agree with Raj that ultimately the only way is to end terrorism originating in Pakistan is to talk to Pakistan. Not only talk to Pakistan, but also rise to the challenge of meeting the aspirations of the Kashmiri people. They haven't been met by unilaterally, diluting Article 370 and removing 35A. You haven't taken them into confidence. You haven't won their hearts and minds. Unless you do that, this terrorism challenge will be there. You can blame whoever you want. There will be many more such conflicts. On that sad note, now I invite Shuma to conclude, or Jayanto Roy Chaudhary, our treasurer, to thank the speakers and everyone. And thank you everyone, Praveen, Vivek, Manish and Raj.
I think it was a wonderful, excellent debate, should I call it? And on behalf of the Media Foundation, I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to all of you for being here this evening, for what has been a truly enriching and thought-provoking dialogue on the media, Operation Sindoor, and India's diplomatic outreach. First and foremost, my deepest gratitude to our distinguished panelists, Mr. Vivek Katju, Mr. Manish Tewari, Dr. C. Rajamohan, and Mr. Praveen Swami. Your insights, drawn from experience in diplomacy, politics, journalism, and strategic affairs, have brought remarkable depth and nuance to today's discussion. Thank you for generously sharing your time and perspectives with us. A very special thanks to our moderator, Mr. Bharat Bhushan. Your steady hand and thoughtful questioning helped keep the conversation both balanced and engaging. You helped bring out the best in each speaker. We are deeply grateful to the India International Center for their continued support and collaboration. In particular, we wish to thank IIC Chairperson Mr. Shyam Saran, Mr. K.N. Srivastav, the Director, and the Program Officer, Miss Shubhra Tandon. Your encouragement and meticulous assistance made this evening possible, and we are truly thankful for your partnership. And of course, to you, our audience, thank you very much. Your presence, your curiosity, your commitment to engaging with critical conversations like these give meaning to forums such as ours. Once again, thank you all. Good night and safe travel.